I've driven along Hooch Road many times before, but I've never noticed a small white farmhouse to my right. It was standing on the side of an old highway that runs through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. This road, with its various sections, such as the Chickasaw Turnpike, has had a rich history. During my grandfather's youth, it was known simply as Hooch Road, a winding dirt road through the Carolina mountains that played an important role in the birth of NASCAR, thanks to the moonshine racing enthusiasts who settled on its turns. The house was neat, newly painted white, and surrounded by a sturdy fence of planks and timber that enclosed a pasture on one side. When steam came out from under the hood of my truck due to a punctured radiator hose, I realized that my time on this road was limited. I quickly pulled into a gravel parking lot and parked halfway to the house. "Hello, is anyone at home?" I called out, knocking on the wooden door. Mountain dwellers might be wary of strangers, but once you earn their trust, they become some of the most hospitable people you could meet. Despite this, I decided to stay on the porch, keeping my distance just in case. After a while, a face appeared in the window above, its features unclear. A female voice asked, "Who are you, and what do you need?" "I'm Joshua Sutton from Waynesville," I replied. "I was hoping I could fix my truck and get some water from you. I have a burst radiator hose, which I quickly repaired a few miles ago, but it doesn't hold up." The woman told me to wait and then disappeared from sight. Looking around the neighborhood, I couldn't help but admire how neat and well-groomed everything looked. The nets were intact, the porch was painted with fresh paint, and there was a wonderful garden on the side of the house. As I headed for the door, I was greeted by two imposing German shepherds who stood silently and obediently next to their owner. "Behave yourself, and the dogs won't bother you," the woman assured me, opening the door and gesturing for me to enter. "Come on in. Can I get you something to drink?" "Can I have a glass of water, please?" I asked. "Are you from the Sutton family of Sandy Hollow?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, ma'am. As far as I know, my ancestors are from Waynesville, and we are not related to Sandy Hollow. But I suppose anything is possible." The woman brought me water and offered me to sit down, her dog watching me closely. The refreshing cold water satisfied my parched throat, and a light breeze from the fan dried the sweat on my shirt. "My name is Sandra Dresser, and these," she pointed to a pair of dogs sitting next to her, "are Samson and Delilah. Nice to meet you. I was wondering if you have any materials that I could use to create a pliable tube that looks like rubber. I saw a group of vintage cars in the field over there." "Oh, don't be shy. Take whatever you need if it helps you," Sandra said. I thanked her and carefully got up from the table, trying not to scare the dogs. Despite my efforts, they stayed on all fours until Sandra ordered them to sit down, and they obediently obeyed. As we walked out the door with the two dogs, I couldn't help but admire Sandra's figure. Coming down from the porch, she looked to be about 30 years old, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tucked under a cap. She was wearing work boots, skinny jeans, and an old t-shirt, and her eyes were bright blue. Grabbing tools from my truck, we headed across the pasture to a group of old cars parked behind a dilapidated barn. I rummaged through the collection and found some flexible steel and rubber hoses, as well as clamps to temporarily fix the car. An hour later, my truck was ready to go. Evening was approaching, and she suggested, "It's time for dinner. Why don't you go inside, clean yourself up, and eat before you continue your journey?" Her invitation was filled with genuine warmth. I hesitated at first, but eventually my rumbling stomach convinced me to agree. The alluring aromas wafting from the kitchen were irresistible, and I couldn't resist. Sandra did not disappoint, serving an appetizing dish of smoked pork chops, creamy mashed potatoes, fragrant collard greens, and spicy black-eyed peas, accompanied by warm, moist cornbread. To top it all off, she treated me to a delicious bread pudding and steaming hot coffee. "Sandra, that was the most delicious meal I've eaten in years," I complimented. "Nothing unusual," she tried to downplay it. "I don't have many guests, and I like to cook, so I think you came just in time." She fed a few pieces to the two dogs, who were looking at me the whole time I was there. They quickly devoured the food and continued to sit with their tongues hanging out. "By the way, what are those old cars near your barn? If you want to sell a few of them, I know a couple of people who might be interested." After a brief glance at me, she said, "They actually belong to my ex-husband. They've just been standing here since he left. A Fairlane and a Ford pickup truck. You can make good money if you decide to sell them. He hasn't been here for 2 years, and I think we need to do something about it," she admitted. "A year ago, a man from Knoxville came to us and tried to buy them at a very low price. He thought I was gullible, but I didn't fall for it and sent him away," she reminisced, a smile spreading across her face, lighting up the whole room. I helped her clean up after dinner, and when I was done, I realized that it was time for me to hit the road before it got dark. Although I had only met this woman a few hours ago, there was a charming politeness about her. As I was preparing to leave, I felt a little disappointed. "Miss Sandra, I have a friend who would be very interested in buying your '57 Ford if you're going to sell it. I'll be happy to let him know. Here is my business card. Feel free to call me. I will be happy to come here again in the future," I said, handing her my card. I think she understood that I was hinting at a return visit, but for now, she left the decision to her. After shaking hands kindly, I started the car and drove back to Hooch Road. As I drove along Highway 320-25 toward Pittman Center, I couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful woman in the white farmhouse. She informed me that her ex-husband had left 2 years ago, just at the time when I became an ex myself. Every day, I think about the past, about how bad it was, and how good I felt back then. Unfortunately, the wrong people keep reminding me of this. My marriage to my ex-wife lasted 5 years before she left. I always thought it was a good 5 years, and June still holds that opinion. But it's been a long time since we first met. Back then, she was just a 19-year-old waitress at a diner, and I was a 23-year-old handyman who was trying to make ends meet by transporting truck parts across several counties. Despite financial difficulties, I managed to cover all my expenses. On the other hand, June could afford to pay for the car while she lived with her parents. It was at this time that I plucked up the courage and asked her out on a date, but she rejected me, saying she was already dating someone from Asheville. She didn't realize that she was just a casual fling for the drum circle statue and nothing more. When I stopped by the barbecue bar later, there was a break in their relationship. I took a chance and asked her out again, and this time, she agreed. We had dinner together, had a beer, and went to the violinist show in Maddie Valley, where we had an amazing time. It was so pleasant that we repeated it several more times. All in all, it was an unforgettable time. A few months after I proposed, we tied the knot in a beautiful outdoor ceremony next to a charming old country church in Sunburst, North Carolina. A year after that, we managed to save up money and buy a gorgeous white frame house on a few acres south of town. There was nothing extravagant about it, but there was a place for a garden and a barn where I could work on my projects. At that time, we didn't have children yet, and June combined working at a barbecue cafe with classes at the local community college. For several years, I was constantly on the move, delivering and taking orders, sometimes staying overnight in Tennessee. This continued until June graduated from high school and got a job as a shift nurse at the local county hospital. I continued to make daily trips and eventually got promoted to regional manager, which did not greatly affect the time spent on the road, but increased my salary thanks to commissions from all sales. Since we both worked full-time and June worked shifts, we had to cherish the time we could spend together. During the week, she usually had to take turns every weekend, and every 12 weeks, she switched to night shifts with a 12-hour shift. The only positive thing was the salary increase. Over time, she began to earn almost as much as I did, which allowed us to double the payments for the house. On weekends, when her schedule allowed, we visited several nightclubs in Asheville, along with several other couples we knew. Gradually, some of her colleagues began to join us, resulting in a weekend party consisting of about 12 people who got together quite regularly. We often visited the dance hall on Patton Road in Asheville. It was a cramped and narrow room that comfortably accommodated many people. As a rule, we came in pairs. Most of us were married. Throughout the evening, like June, I danced with different people. I didn't see anything wrong with that because usually people dance with friends or acquaintances from school. I did the same thing as June. As I said, everything was fine. We left with the same people we came with. But as it often happens, there will always be someone or something that will ruin everything. A few months after we started going to this place, I always danced with a girl from our band named Terry, who was June's colleague. She kept taking us to the other side of the dance floor, but I didn't think much of it at the time because I was generally naive. When the next music track started playing, she snuggled up to me in a slow dance. We're far away from our table, in the corner of the room. I thought, "Jesus, Terry, what are you thinking about?" I asked. "Nothing you don't already want," she replied with a seductive smile. As a young man dancing with a beautiful woman who smelled amazing, my blood boiled. But despite the temptation, I was happily married and promised to be faithful. "Terry, I'm devoted to one woman," I insisted. If June hadn't been there, we probably would have been at my house next week. "But June will do it tonight," I said with a smile, trying not to brush her off. She just smiled back and replied, "Oh, someday I'll have the opportunity." We moved on to another topic and finished the dance, after which I returned her to the escort, a man named Tom. June and a few other people were still dancing, and looking around the dance floor, I noticed that she was dancing very close to a man I didn't recognize. He whispered in her ear, making her smile and laugh. Suddenly, he grabbed her, and she seemed to like it. I briefly thought about joining the dance, but then I remembered Terry. Looking back, I realized that I should have intervened, but that moment had already passed. Another round of drinks was ordered, and June returned to the table with her new dance partner. I pretended I didn't know when she introduced him as Charlie, a school friend before his family moved to Asheville. I immediately disliked him, most likely because of where he put his hand. His smug expression, and the way he looked at me with his hand on my wife's shoulder, also contributed to this. But when June noticed my reaction, she took his hand away, and eventually he left after a short exchange of opinions. I wanted to contradict him, but I kept my composure. The conversation on the way home was predictable. "Do you let every man touch you when you dance with him, June?" I asked. "No more than if you were touched by a girl," she replied, surprising me. She quickly took me to the other side of the room. "I'm not going to let this happen, and I'm going to stop it," I replied. "Well, you too, big boy. Are you jealous every time a man thinks he has a chance at the impossible?" June replied. She chuckled, easing the tension in the room. "Charlie has about the same chance of getting me into bed as Terry," she said confidently, and she was right. After it was getting close to midnight, we decided to leave for the night. When we got home, I managed to have a good time with her. Everything went well. For the next few months, we met regularly, distributing the duties of drivers among ourselves. One Saturday night, I found myself one of the few men in a group dominated by women. 4 men from our company were unable to attend the weekend meeting. June and several of her friends were enthusiastically drinking tequila and thirsty to get drunk. June's tendency to lose all her inhibitions when drinking tequila was well known. This meant that she would have to be tinkered with. I tried my best to keep up with her and dance as much as possible. The dance floor quickly filled with other girls, including June's friend who was supposed to keep an eye on June and the rest of the group. While I fended off Terry's audacious advances, she joined the other girls outside to get some fresh air. "Josh, she's safe," Terry said. When the dancing ended, I found myself back on the patio where the smokers indulged in their habit. June and her friends were still laughing, so I decided to leave them alone and return to the table. Most of the party participants were on the dance floor, and I joined Terry and another girl they were talking to. They were both very drunk, and the other girl was completely drunk. "Josh, June says you have a giant in your pants," the drunk girl muttered. I burst into loud laughter when she was having trouble pronouncing the words, and Terry was just grinning stupidly. But then she accidentally said something that sobered us all up. I was the only one at the table who didn't drink too much. Drunk people find everything funny and don't have a filter. "It's not fair that she has two, and we don't have one," she complained. They thought it was funny and started giggling. But soon Terry realized the gravity of the situation. The meaning of these words became obvious to me when they burst out of the mouth of this drunk girl. Ignoring Terry's reaction, I casually asked, "Who else has such a big one?" Charlie's name slipped by before she could stop, earning a disapproving look from Terry. "Oops, probably shouldn't have said that, right?" she hissed, trying to back away. After Terry's reaction, even under the influence of alcohol, Terry seemed to understand the significance of the conversation at the table. I went to the bathroom when Terry tried to intervene. "Not now, Terry," I said firmly. The comments made may have had a different meaning than it seemed to me at first glance, and this left me in the dark. Two tipsy women were laughing at the fact that there were two men in my wife's life, me and a man named Charlie. It was unclear if they were hinting that she had a history with him before me during our relationship or now. Perhaps it was just the ravings of a man who had drunk too much. When closing time came, I gathered an intoxicated group of friends in the courtyard. The two of us appointed drivers, loaded everyone into 2 cars, and set off. When June and I arrived home at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had to drag her to bed like a sack. Sitting outside and sipping a beer, I thought about the situation. If this behavior was a one-time thing, I could put up with it, but it seems to be becoming a pattern. This is not just a one-time occurrence. The irony is that I know how she feels about me. If she had a slip-up due to excessive drinking or something like that, I would forgive it as a one-time mistake. But if it was the same Charlie as a few months ago, it would be unforgivable. Sometimes I stayed over at her place on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. June had a day off on Tuesdays, which gave her a great opportunity to do what she loved without the risk of being caught. It seems fate played a role in my marriage. On Tuesday evening, instead of staying in Seville, Tennessee, I drove back to Waynesville armed with a bag of barbecue and a few drinks. I settled down to watch the game from the upper field next to our house. When I arrived at 11 o'clock in the evening, I noticed that June's car was gone. I called her and told her I'd be home late. She replied that she planned to stay at home, watch TV, and maybe call her sister or someone else before going to bed. I was sitting in the car, leaning back with the window down. The radio was playing. The lights in the cabin were turned off. Around midnight, 2 pairs of headlights drove out of Waynesville and slowed down before turning into the yard. June's car stayed in its usual place, and another car parked right behind her. Unsurprisingly, it was him. He drove up, Charlie, a cheeky shoe cleaner with a cowboy hat. Everything was going on as usual. The lights came on in the bedroom, then the night lights, which we strategically placed by the bed, softly lit up. Despite the temptation to go inside, I stayed where I was, consumed with anger at her and at the whole world. If I had evil intentions, I could have resorted to drastic measures, but the thought of prison, even the local county detention center, scared me off. I stayed where I was until the lights came on at 2 o'clock in the morning. Soon, her lover appeared from the front door. He kissed her, exchanged words, and walked silently to his car, while June scolded him for being silent. As I said before, if I were some kind of terrible person, Charlie would be decomposing in the ground at the moment. But I decided to start the car, turn off the headlights, and drive back to Waynesville. Over the next 2 weeks, I made several more unsuccessful attempts. As a result, I finally decided to give up when they returned home earlier than usual the following week. I took action. I crossed the street, walked up to his car, and flattened all 4 of his tires, as well as one of June's tires. When I got to the back of the house, I noticed that the night lights were already on, and the bedroom window was open to let in cool air. Quietly entering through the back door, I turned on the video recording function on my phone and headed to the bedroom. Turning on the light, I met their surprised looks, which were truly priceless. "It seems like a pretty brave thing to do," I told them both. He staggered aimlessly, not understanding what was going on around him. June was clearly shocked to be caught, and sobbed uncontrollably. I gestured at the gun on my belt and ordered him to leave immediately. Hastily grabbing his clothes, he rushed past me, desperately trying to escape. When the door slammed behind him, he let out a scream. "Oh my God, my car!" he shouted, realizing that his tires were cut. Without looking back, he disappeared, never returning to the house. "Josh, let me be clear. I understand that there are many excuses for the behavior of all participants, but in the end, when all is said and done, there comes a moment of realization that is shocking," June pleaded. "Please be quiet and listen to everything I have to tell you," I replied. "Just tell me one number. Tell me how many times it has been pleasant for you to communicate with this person." "Josh, I'm begging you to listen to me," she begged. "Just one number." "How many times?" I repeated. "I will ask you over and over again until you answer." "Just once, I swear," she exclaimed. "Thank God," I muttered, leaving the bedroom and heading to the kitchen for a cold beer. The floor creaked softly as I looked at her in a worn pink robe. After finishing my drink, I opened another one and went outside. The jerk was gone, his car with 4 flat tires glistening in the moonlight. I chuckled to myself, feeling satisfied with my manhood. A few weeks ago, I had already let out all my tears. Now it was necessary to focus on the task at hand. I took my truck out of the field and parked it behind the house, considering my next steps. I remembered the hitch in the barn, which was ideal for transporting goods. I hitched the bastard's car to the hitch and started the 5-mile drive to Waynesville. As I was driving about 1.5 miles down the road, I passed him. His car flattened off the wheels, following me on all 4 wheels. I left his car in the parking lot and drove home. When I entered the house, June was sitting at the kitchen table. "Josh, can we talk about this, please?" she asked. I looked at her and just answered, "Not today." After which, I took the remaining 6 bottles and went to my office. This is a men's cave for mechanics, and I've set up a pretty decent place for myself to rest in the attic. To the soundtrack from the Mars Hotel, I finished the rest of my beer and fell asleep. The next day, I called my boss and said that I had personal problems that needed to be solved at home. "I went back to the house to deal with this situation, June. It's time for you to move in and live with your sister. It's your own fault for this situation," I said. To my surprise, she didn't protest. Perhaps she thought that if she called it a one-time mistake, then everything would be fine. After the 2 of them fixed the flat tire, her sister helped load their things into both cars before leaving. Meetings eventually led to something that changed her excuses. The constant excuse was that we were young and constantly making mistakes, that we could fix everything, and maybe even start a family. It became inexorable. I got to the point where I only answered work-related calls. I told June to get everything she needed from home while I was at work. I decided to keep the house for myself and buy out her share without offering alimony. We invested everything we had in the house, apart from a small pension from work. It was a simple decision. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, but attempts to reconcile did not stop. June often bothered me at the restaurant, joining me at the counter or bar. Her sister regularly came to chat and bring me food. At some point, I suspected that she might be interested in me, but it turned out not to be so. In the end, I came up with a new plan to put an end to all this. I contacted Terry and invited her to go to the club on Patton on Friday night. I was surprised when she agreed to spend the whole weekend at my house and ended up in my bed. This woman turned out to be bigger than I expected. She completely exhausted me, but I couldn't wipe the smile off my face all week. I chose Terry not only because of her qualities, but also because I knew she couldn't keep secrets. I was sure she would share all the details with her work friends, including June. Surprisingly, everything turned out even better than I imagined, including June. Surprisingly, everything turned out even better than I imagined. The next weekend came, and on Friday evening, I decided to go to the dance hall alone. It looks like June switched to the day shift as she was there with some members of our old band, and to my surprise, with Charlie. The thought processes of women have always been a mystery to me, but I suppose this is a typical male point of view. June, her sister, her parents, and other people from the past, not counting a few women with other intentions, were making plans for our reunion. And yet she was with Charlie, sitting at the bar. I leisurely enjoyed a cold beer, watching couples dancing on the dance floor. Suddenly, June and Charlie came out on the dance floor and put on a rousing performance. It seemed for my entertainment. After they finished, the cretin returned to his table, and June came up to me at the bar. "It doesn't have to be like this, Josh," she said, confused. I replied, "What do you mean? We're not together, and I'm not with anyone else. I'm the only one here," I said, looking around the room defiantly. June's face began to turn red, a familiar sign that she was about to lose her temper. I quickly intervened, leaned over to her, and said softly, "Listen carefully, June. I don't care that this person lives in your house. You have been with him for a long time, so you can continue to communicate with him. I'm sure you know that I had a great time with your friend Terry last weekend," I said. Her reaction was instantaneous. She jumped back and slapped me hard in the face, after which she burst into tears. Her lover, who was sitting at the table, got up and started moving towards the bar, but hesitated when I raised my hand in his direction. "Do you see that person you're with now?" I said. He freezes when I raise my hand. All he cares about is having a good time and nothing more. This has always been his priority, and you've given him what should have been mine over and over again. You took away what was sacred between us and let this person get into our lives, and now you have to put up with it. I've had enough." With these last words, I finished the rest of the beer and left. She ran after me with tears in her eyes. When I left, I ended up at Jack of the Wood, enjoying green man ale and watching the dancing girls. I later found out that June left with a friend shortly after me, and it was said that she did not go out as often as before, even though June claimed that I was dating Terry again. I resisted the temptation because I was focused on my work. June kept coming up to me at every opportunity and seemed to have realized that this was a futile effort. Another problem that arose was the relationship between her parents and mine. Despite my absence, my parents continued to invite June to the barbecue. She became to them like the daughter they never had, and they didn't want to part with her. Divorce and its consequences motivated all of us to make changes in our lives. Personally, I found solace in returning to the forest. Growing up in the Smokies and the national forests gave me a sense of belonging and identity. I didn't know what it meant to be a hillbilly, but I knew I wasn't. I discovered that deep down, I have a passion for forestry. As a result, I decided to change my usual lifestyle. Instead of sticking to my usual route through Murphy or crossing I-40 at the entrance to Tennessee, I chose the scenic Hooch Road through the mountains. It may have been a little longer, but the scenic ride and good weather were worth it. I even had the opportunity to stop and enjoy fishing by the stream. It's a mystery to me how, in all these trips, I never noticed a charming white house on the Tennessee side, but one day it still caught my attention. When I finished mowing the lawn and decided to take a break with a cold beer, the phone suddenly rang in my pocket. It was Sandra Dresser from Cosby, the woman I visited last week to fix my truck. For several days, I couldn't get her out of my head. Something about her bothered me despite our brief meeting. I was going to contact her about the '57 Ford to get some new information. "Hello, Miss Sandra. Your hospitality always makes a lasting impression on me. I was planning to contact you soon about your old Ford, as well as some other cars you mentioned. Your mention of them aroused my interest, and I decided to act. I thought it would be helpful if you would come and help me decide on my next steps. You have 11 old cars, and all of them, as far as I remember, were in excellent condition, both in body and frame. The next steps are clear and understandable. Evaluate and sell them, I said. She already knew about it, which made the invitation intimate. I'm going to go there next Thursday, but to be honest, I don't mind going for a ride in the mountains tomorrow, because Sunday promises to be wonderful, I said, offering the suggestion optimistically and with faith. Half an hour later, I was sitting at a barbershop in Waynesville, enjoying a haircut and choosing a great Cabernet for the trip. Although I usually prefer beer, I can still tell a good red wine from a bad one. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I set off on a familiar route under a clear blue sky. Driving through a large stream, I noticed fishermen casting fishing rods on both sides of the bridge. I was tempted to stop and look at them, but I had obligations. As I was approaching my destination, I saw a young guy fishing for a large trout weighing 1 pound, caught apparently with fly fishing bait. Continuing on my way, passing by Miss Sandra's house, I noticed she was chatting animatedly with a man, and her 2 dogs were closely watching her every move. After parking the car and walking down the driveway, I noticed another man sitting in another car and watching the conversation. The conversation grew louder as I approached. Bill mentioned that I could get a 65th share in exchange for the work I did for him a few months ago, he said. Sandra stated, I don't know anything about any arrangements. Bill left here 2 years ago, so if he promised you something, resolve all remaining issues directly with Bill. Before he could speak, I said, Good morning, Miss Sandra. Is everything okay here? She looked at me with slight concern before answering. It's okay, Josh. This gentleman was just about to leave. The man's gaze met mine, full of rage, but I just smiled and wished him a good day. What was that? I asked. I think my ex-husband is giving me trouble. He is forbidden to enter the territory and even drive on the road in front of the house because of a court injunction, she explained. I couldn't help but smile and replied, How convenient. Before I forget, I brought a bottle of wine, Street Francis Cabernet. If you want, put it in the refrigerator for a while. A benevolent smile did not leave her face as we returned to the porch, accompanied by the dogs. When the wine was safely stowed away, we sat down in an armchair and discussed the collection of old cars near the barn. Among them were the 57 Ford, the 65 Fairlane, the 67 Barracuda, the 69 Olds 442nd, and the 48 Caddy, as well as several other inconspicuous sedans. It was a pretty valuable hiding place, especially if she could get a fair price for them. I mentioned that I know someone who would be interested in paying a good sum for the 57 Ford. I think in the current state, you could get from $8,000 to $10,000 for it. I informed her. Let them know that I'm interested, she replied. We continued to discuss the details, and I decided to contact a person in Seville who specialized in selling such things. I was hoping he would help sell it on commission to ensure a good price. When everything was settled, I was treated to a delicious fried chicken dish with all the necessary seasonings. After tidying up and clearing the table, we walked through the pasture and entered the mountain forest behind her house. The terrain was just amazing, a combination of farmland and mountains with lush greenery. We stopped next to a bubbling stream, admiring the peaceful landscape. So Josh, tell me about yourself. Are you married, single, in a relationship, divorced? Where have you been and where are you going? She asked. I was caught off guard, not knowing how to respond, and decided to be honest by telling her a simplified version of my story. I shared with her the story of how I caught June with her companion, which eventually led to the collapse of our marriage. I also told her about how she, her sister, her parents, my parents, and all our friends tried to reconcile us in an attempt to show June that I was moving on. I even mentioned dating Terry to get a reaction. I admitted that I had dated others, but nothing serious. Sandra listened with a knowing smile, showing that she too was experiencing a similar situation to one degree or another. Josh, let me share my story with you. I made the mistake of getting married right after graduating from high school. It turned out to be the biggest regret of my life. If I had known that after a few good years everything would turn upside down so quickly, I would have gotten out of this situation sooner. My ex-husband had delusional ideas, as did your wife. He was amused when I called her Pinocchio. That's probably the funniest name I could think of for him. I don't know if you knew Bill Dresser. He's on the south side of Hazelwood in Balham, not too far from where you are right now. It turns out, according to my father, Bill was in love with Cosby's girlfriend, who turned out to be not as interesting as he thought. They had something going on a few times, but he didn't mention that he was married. When she found out that I was his wife, she quickly ended the relationship. It's pretty funny, really. One day, she came to our house while Bill was at work, apologized, and confessed everything to me. Although we've known each other since high school, we've never moved in the same social circles. Apparently, Bill was persistent and did not accept refusals. As a result, the girl went to Texas to live with her father, including because of Bill's constant harassment. What a jerk. I thought the expression jerk was appropriate. He chased her all the way to Texas. She called me to tell me about it, and then I decided to pack all his things and leave them on the porch, telling him to come and get them before they deteriorated in the rain. 2 days later, he returned, broke into the house in my absence, made a mess, and brought his things back into the house. When I returned home with Samson and Delilah in the evening, I put him in a corner with both dogs cleaning up after him from the lawn. Do my dogs really know who their owner is? She gently stroked both dogs, and they sat at my feet, happily wagging their tails and watching me. The next day, Dad and I visited the law office to get a restraining order against him. A few days later, he was taken to work. The following week, he returned to Texas and resumed his pursuit of the girl. I still talk to her sometimes. He may be a good guy, but she's wise enough to keep him at a distance. As far as I know, he lives in some woman's trailer in Silva. Sandra didn't seem bothered by this situation. She continued to smile brightly. Getting rid of this jerk was the best decision of my life, she said. After thinking about it, our conversation continued, and I found out that Sandra had adjusted well to life after the divorce. She worked as a midwife in East Tennessee, mostly in the foothills. The farm she lived on was inherited from her grandmother, and before the divorce, she grew tobacco on a 3-acre plot. After she took care of the farm, there was no one to take care of it, and it fell into disrepair. While preparing to leave, I inspected the old cars near the barn and took some pictures to share with a friend. Despite the late hour and early work schedule the next day, we said goodbye warmly, hugged, and she kissed me on the cheek. I'll come by this week, maybe Thursday, if I get a response from my friend from Seville. If I can't come, I'll definitely call you. I will be very glad. Mr. Josh Sutton replied with a smile. That Sunday afternoon, I went excitedly to Hooch Road, feeling like a boy in love. It wasn't really a date, but it was more than just a pastime. I couldn't wait for Thursday. Every Tuesday at the barbecue restaurant, there was a special promotion. Fried catfish with all seasonings for $9.95, including drinks. The dish included thin strips of fish, collard beans, potato salad, and the famous Carolina buns. June and I often visited this place, but this evening I decided to go alone and took a booth to enjoy a meal while reading the newspaper. I barely had time to take a bite when they entered the restaurant, and noticing me, quickly and without hesitation joined me in the booth. Mom and June took the seats across from me. I couldn't deny that June looked amazing. She looked more than fine, and she was well aware that I had noticed it. Do you two always randomly show up when I'm sitting like this? I asked casually. We come here every Tuesday, Josh. You know that, her mom replied. June just smiled and turned on the charm with a twinkle in her eyes. She looked even more attractive. Feeling trapped, I reluctantly joined them. When we all loaded our plates at the buffet and sat down to eat. It seemed like there was a competition going on to see who would eat the most, and I was a participant in it. It was one of the strangest meals in recent times. It was like old times for the three of them. "Isn't that great, Mom?" exclaimed June with a big smile on her face, remembering how the four of us used to gather here every week. June's face lit up with memories. I just needed to go to the bathroom. When I returned, Mom started to get up to let me back in, but I stopped her by gently touching her shoulder. "No need. I have an early trip, and I need to go to bed." I put a $20 bill on the table, smiled, and wished everyone a good night, including June, who had a satisfied grin. I walked out the door. It was only 6:30 p.m., and I was already sitting in the Bujum Terum with a cold pint of beer in my hand. The pub has always been a favorite place, but recently it has become even better as the owners, Ben and Kelsey, have started hosting concerts there on Saturdays. Now there was enough space to dance and enjoy the music. June and her colleagues didn't particularly like this place, so I made it a rule to come here often. Besides, it was a good place to meet like-minded women. That evening, Ben was serving at the bar and serving me my favorite double IPA, and I was looking around the neighborhood. A few girls were playing billiards, and some were sipping their drinks and watching the game on TV. "It's been a while, stranger. How are you? What's up?" she asked, sitting down next to me. As always, Terry looked incredibly attractive, perfect for such a relaxed evening. "It's been a long time since we last met." "Well, Terry, you look amazing, and life seems to be kind to you." I sincerely praised her. "I'm holding on," she replied. "Things have been a bit hectic lately, but having you here gives me hope." With that, she gently stroked my thigh. I bought her a beer, and we found a table in a corner next to the pool tables where the girls were playing. While we were talking, I found out that the old band still meets on weekends, and even June takes part in the fun. Terry didn't say anything about her ex's current whereabouts, and I knew it wasn't my business. But the longer we talked, the more I realized that I wanted to spend the evening with her. We went to my house and eventually we got down to business and fell asleep. A few hours later, since she didn't have a job the next morning, I let her relax in bed and spend time with me. "Josh, I know we're not looking for a serious relationship, but I thought it would be nice to have casual relationships from time to time. Do you mind? After everything went well last night and this morning, I think it might work." "I don't mind, as long as neither of us starts a serious relationship," I replied. Sandra called me the same day and said she would be back home on Thursday afternoon and evening, unless she had to leave for a sudden delivery. This call made my day really happy. I contacted a friend in Sevierville, and after reading his letter, I realized that Sandra would only benefit if she accepted his offer. When I returned home that evening, the house was in chaos. Terry was in the house as I advised in the morning, and by lunchtime, June and my mother came to me on a far-fetched pretext. It wasn't the first time she'd done this. She always had a list of excuses ready. Otherwise, my mom might have come for other reasons. It was obvious that Terry was here for a reason, regardless of my presence. June seemed disoriented by the unexpected appearance of another woman in the place where her house once was. But despite my mom's attempts to act as a mediator, the two seemed to have a fight. Fortunately, apart from disheveled hair and smeared makeup, no one was seriously injured. The pot with the plant was overturned, but the physical damage was not limited to this. Half an hour later, Mom, Dad, and June drove up to the house while I was waiting for them to come in. I broke my neck. Mom spoke first. "Josh, I do not know what kind of household you run, but allowing guests to come and go at any time is unacceptable." The father remained silent, realizing that it was better not to interfere. I looked at June and then back at Mom, looking at her questioningly. "So, how old am I, Mom?" "You're 30, she replied. "And how long have I been living on my own?" "Since you turned 19, I think," she replied. "That's right. Since I was 19, I confirmed. And I've been living in this house since I was 24, right? She nodded in confirmation. Am I a married man, Mom? Well, you were, and you should be, she replied. I interjected. I was really married before, but not now. Do you understand? Now let's move on to the next question, Mom. Who are these guests you were talking about? As far as I know, there was only one living in this house, and I found her in bed with another man. So, who are these guests running around my house? I'm interested to know. My mom and June were sitting on the couch in shock and couldn't speak. My father started to say something about not talking to my mother like that, but stopped before she could get into any more trouble, and I continued talking. Let me tell you frankly about some things. In fact, this house belongs to me. At the age of 30, I am not married and do not lead a religious lifestyle. So from time to time, I like to have fun in the company. Then June cried out with tears in her eyes, "You can always take me with you." I giggled and took another sip of my drink. I replied jokingly, "You've already been to my place once, and look how it turned out." Having set some boundaries, I firmly stated, "Okay, here's what I don't want. Anyone to enter my house when I'm not there." I didn't think about it before, but now everything is clear. If I can't trust you, I'll change the locks. If you don't like my guests, please don't hesitate. Come back another time, and we can roast hamburgers together. But if an attractive guest appears in my bachelor apartment, imagine how awkward it would be if my parents try to interrogate her. I grinned at the three of them. Does anyone want to have a beer? June, you too. My parents took the drinks and took the cold chicken out of the fridge. I took June to my workshop. There's no reason for you to come to my house and criticize the people I talk to or any other aspect of my life. June. Absolutely none. I know you're having fun with someone else right now. Why is it acceptable for you to have fun with another man, but you're angry if Susie Q, Jill on the Hill, and even Terry get the affection you threw away for that jerk Charlie? You created this situation, June, not me. I do not know who you are in a relationship with right now, and to be honest, I am not interested. I don't care. So it all comes down to this. It's time to start behaving respectfully and moving forward in life. Please stop trying to involve my parents in your problems. I know they care about you, and you care about them, but it's important not to involve Terry. She didn't hurt you, and neither did I. When she looked at the ground, I could see the pain in her eyes. Despite her love for me, she continued to betray me. When we returned to the house, Mom and Dad were relaxing in armchairs, absorbed in an old TV show. After everyone left, I was finally able to relax, except for the upcoming phone call from Terry, which I had to answer to apologize for the chaotic family meeting. The next day, while I was having lunch at a local diner, June's sister joined me at my booth. "Hi, Josh. You look as attractive as ever," she greeted me warmly. "I have always admired your kindness." As I mentioned earlier during our conversation, June shared with me the details of the events of the previous day. I think she understood everything, Josh. Really, I'm upset about how things turned out, and you know how I feel about it. If you weren't my brother-in-law, and you always will be, I would protect you myself. I'll do my best to steer her in a different direction and see how things go, but it seems like everything you said resonated with her because she told me she plans to move on. I'm glad to hear that, and I appreciate your support. I've always had feelings for her, but I won't be able to forgive her actions. Yes, she is aware of it. She's been fixated on that terrible guy she's been with since you first met, but I think she realizes now that she lost everything because of him. I just nodded, and we continued our conversation until she had to leave for work. I paid the bill and went to the mountains to get to Tennessee. Sandra was in the garden when I arrived at her place on Thursday, and her dogs, as usual, notified me of my presence. It was incredibly hot that day, and she was dressed appropriately, very short jeans and a tight t-shirt and nothing else. I tried my best not to look at her visibly strained form under the thin fabric. She willingly hugged me before we headed into the house to prepare a treat. "My babies adore you," she said, pointing to the puffing dogs resting on the kitchen floor. "I wish they'd told me about it themselves," I grumbled. She poured herself an iced tea and handed me a cold beer. While we were discussing the specifics of selling her car collection, time flew by quickly. My friend from Sevierville offered to put them up for auction with an 8% commission and a guarantee of $65,000 per lot. Considering the state they were in, I think it was a fair deal, I informed her. Sandra agreed. Having settled all the details, we relaxed on the veranda, sipping drinks in the afternoon sun. "Do you want to swim?" Sandra asked with a mischievous smile. Dad widened and deepened the pool a couple of years ago, and on such a hot day, it's just perfect. I forgot my swimming trunks. "You won't need them. There's no one here," she said. I assured myself that I was not shy about women and that I had no figure flaws, and agreed with a smile. We took beer and towels and went to the back area. When we arrived, Sandra wasted no time taking off her shorts and top, threw them on a nearby branch, and dived into the pond. Washed by a stream, I hesitated for a moment, but then I shrugged and started to undress, finding myself as ready as Sandra. I followed her example and jumped into the pond, entering the water up to my shoulders. Sandra was standing next to me, her face glowing with happiness. This place evoked nostalgic memories from my childhood when my grandmother lived here. We splashed in the water to cool off on hot days, and I remembered it for a long time. I remember the boys from the next road who tried to spy on us until my grandmother asked her dog to stand guard. In those days, the nearest place to swim was Jonathan Creek, where the water was always too cool for comfort. After diving into the water, I swam for a while until I was next to Sandra. When I surfaced, our faces were a few centimeters apart, and I looked into her sparkling blue eyes. The next moment, she hugged me and said, "I like you, Josh Stutton. I really like you." She looked up at me. When I confessed, "I fell in love with you like a schoolboy from the moment we first met." Her answer was simple, "Okay, you can invite me to dinner tonight." With that, we swam a little more before leaving the pond. After drying off and returning home, we decided to have lunch at Cosby's restaurant. Despite the limited choice of restaurants in Cosby, we were attracted by the magnolia tree and the promise of excellent brisket. We were seated at a cozy table away from the hustle and bustle, and I realized that I had received one of the best dinners in recent times, all thanks to the wonderful company of the woman who was sitting next to me. During the conversation, we touched on all imaginable topics, and when the sun began to set, I realized that it was time to accompany her home. It was about 9:30 p.m. when we pulled up to the gravel parking lot. I walked her to the door and kissed her on the lips while her pets, Samson and Delilah, watched us closely. "You don't have to go over there tonight, Josh. I've got the guest room ready for you. Enjoy a hearty breakfast in the morning, and leave when you're ready," she offered with an encouraging smile. Her offer was too tempting to resist. I canceled my evening reservation at the hotel and spent the night in her guest room. The next morning, she sent me to work, treating me to a delicious rustic breakfast. On Saturday afternoon, we arranged a date and dinner in Gatlinburg. That night, we stayed at the charming bed and breakfast inn in the village. Sandra was different from all the women I had met before, especially June and Terry. She had a charming nature that captivated me, and I couldn't help but think that her ex-husband was a fool when he let her go. After that moment, we started dating and maintained a long-distance relationship, often staying at her house and sometimes driving to Waynesville in Sandra's car. I met her father, who was wary of me at first until Sandra talked to him alone. I do not know what exactly she said, but after that, he was always friendly with me. On a beautiful Saturday morning, while fishing on Big Creek, I decided to make an important decision in my life. As soon as this thought occurred to me, the line on my fly fishing rod suddenly tightened, causing the reel to jerk and the line to chase after it until I managed to catch it with my thumb. This served as the signal for the beginning of an exciting struggle, After a few minutes of excitement, I hooked a hefty 1.5 pounds trout, which was a positive omen and confirmation that everything was going smoothly in my life. Later in the afternoon, Sandra and I returned to Waynesville and decided to spend the evening in Asheville. We ended up in a dance hall on Patton, a familiar place where I often spent evenings with my friendly group of friends. Due to my new relationship with Sandra, I didn't see my friends that often, including my friend Terry. But by the will of fate, I ran into them that evening. Terry was there with her new partner, as well as some familiar faces from her past, including colleagues from the hospital where Terry and June were still working. I noticed Terry at the other end of the room, surrounded by old friends and acquaintances. June seemed pleased with the company of a man I didn't know. Even though she was trying to move forward with her life, she still found time to apologize for the fact that our marriage had broken up. My parents continued to accept her as a member of the family, which, as it seemed to me, did not touch me at all. June didn't know that Sandra and I were in a serious relationship, and it was the first time she saw us together. Sandra and I were dancing and chatting at the bar when June came up behind me. "Hello, stranger," she greeted me. When I turned to face her, I said, "Hello, June. You look great." I looked around the room for her companion. "You're Josh, too," she replied. "Your parents told me you're doing well in Tennessee. I am sincerely happy for you." I introduced her to Sandra, noticing the notes of sadness in her eyes, which she skillfully hid. We exchanged a light hug, after which she returned to her company. Suddenly, I felt a sharp blow to the head, which made Sandra scream, "No, Bill, don't do that." But it was already too late. He swung at me again, and I hit back with my right, knocking him to the ground. Sandra started crying, and June suddenly rushed to help the man lying on the ground. "Jesus, Josh, what were you thinking?" June exclaimed. I stared at her, trying to understand the situation, but then it dawned on me that this man was actually her companion. June explained that he was the one who attacked me, and not the other way around, as she had thought before. The bouncers immediately escorted him out of the hall, and June went to the bathroom to recover. Sandra and I returned to the bar where 2 fresh drinks were waiting for us, courtesy of the establishment. Sandra revealed that she has a restraining order against Bill because he is unstable. I nodded in agreement, trying to put my anxious thoughts aside. This incident ruined our evening, but when we were about to leave, June came up to us again. Sandra explained who he was and what he did, and June almost burst into tears since he was her traveling companion. She was left without a car, so we decided to take her to Anne's sister's house. As we were leaving, June stopped to say goodbye to someone. Sandra and I headed for the parking lot, and June followed. Suddenly, I saw a bright flash and heard a loud bang in front of me. I reacted quickly and fell to the ground. Billy Dresser fell backward. I quickly checked myself for damage but felt nothing, deciding that the drunken brawler had only hit me. Suddenly, Sandra let out a startled scream. I turned around and saw June lying on the ground while the house guards were rushing to the scene. I knelt down next to her and saw that she was still breathing, barely regaining consciousness. Time seemed to freeze as if I was watching the unfolding events from the sidelines. The woman asked me to get out of the way and began to provide first aid. After a few minutes, which seemed like a moment to me, but were actually a few minutes, an ambulance doctor arrived and took over. June was taken to the hospital, and we followed her. It occurred to me to contact and inform her of the situation and ask her to join us at the hospital. When it arrived, June had already been taken to the operating room. We sat anxiously in the waiting room and waited for news. After a while, a nurse appeared and informed us that June was still undergoing surgery. It would be some time before they could report her condition. At that time, her condition remained critical. I left Sandra to go get some food, and when I returned, I found them standing by the window with their hands clasped. I looked confused, but after we managed to get some food for her, we all gathered nearby to wait for the operation to finish. 3 hours later, The doctor appeared to inform us about June's condition. She is currently in the intensive care unit, and apparently she will be able to survive. The full extent of her injuries will be known only after she wakes up from the artificial coma necessary for the healing of the body. The bullet shattered on impact. Some fragments grazed the medial temporal lobe, which could potentially affect some aspects of her memory. But apparently, her motor functions were not affected, which was demonstrated during the operation. More detailed information will be provided in the coming days as her condition improves. We were given some time to sit with her, and Sandra and I comforted a distraught June. The next day, the doctors gave her parents the latest news, which matched the information received the day before. June was in an artificial coma for 4 days. When she finally woke up, her parents were by her side, and the first person she asked to meet was me, and brought me up to date before I visited June at the hospital. Despite a slight opacity in her right eye, which doctors say will improve over time, June has demonstrated good speech and hearing abilities. She has partially lost her memory and does not remember how and where she was hurt and by whom. "Josh, you have to be ready for this," she told me. "She thinks she's still married to you, as if nothing has happened in the last few years. She even thinks that you are planning to start a family together. As a result, you may have to postpone these plans for a couple of months." I didn't know what to do next and even thought about going to the hospital, but Sandra, in her wisdom, refused to listen to any suggestions. She escorted me to the hospital but stayed in the hallway while I went upstairs. June looked unwell, but she was already awake and resting. Her parents had just left the room and were by her side. Without delay, she asked, "Josh, where are my wedding rings? I remember putting them on yesterday morning before all this," and looked at me with a mournful expression, seeming to expect an answer from me as if I were still her spouse. I didn't know what to do. The thing was, I was in love. The wedding ring was in the dresser in my bedroom, waiting for the moment that I hoped would come in a few days. "June, do you know what date or year it is now?" I asked quietly. "It's probably July of the year 2012, she replied, confused by the doctor's contradictory information. I turned to her, who was avoiding my gaze with tears in her eyes. "June, don't worry about your things right now. Your health and possible memory recovery are the top priority," I said with a slight attempt at a smile. But my worried look overshadowed her. June reached out to take my hand as I sat down, and I accepted the gesture, trying to make sense of the situation. We discussed various topics, including family and recovery. After that, in the waiting room, I talked to June's doctor about the prospects of her memory. It turned out that she perceives most of her memories easily, recognizes family and friends, but it was difficult for her to piece together dates and events. Some things she couldn't remember, like her infidelity. I asked the doctor if she could restore those memories. The doctor explained that it was difficult to predict, suggesting that memories could be triggered by a certain person or place. The doctor could not tell her how to live on, saying only that it was unknown whether these memories would return to her. In any case, the probability of this was 50-50. The decision was hers to stay in the same place or maybe take it all back. It was unclear. After expressing my gratitude to the doctor, I hugged him warmly. I confessed to her that I had planned to propose to Sandra on the night of June's incident, but I didn't have time to. To my surprise, she told me that Sandra had already confessed my intentions to her. It seems I wasn't as secretive as I thought. In fact, I've already made a decision. All that remained was to go downstairs and start acting. The couple rode a Can-Am Spyder F3S along the gravel path near the old house. The wind ruffled their hair and raised a cloud of dust. When we arrived at the bridge over a large stream, we decided to stop for a rest, to stretch our legs and try our luck in catching a large brown trout. To our surprise, this elusive fish still swims in those waters to this day. It's been a year since June was injured, and Bill Dresser ended up in jail after our confrontation in Asheville. As a result, I sold my house in Waynesville and got the opportunity to work in the regional office in Cosby, which I did willingly. I rented an extra room at Sandra's farmhouse as my job required day trips, although I still had to work in the regional office in Cosby, which I did willingly. I rented an extra room at Sandra's farmhouse as my job required day trips, although I still had to work at night. It was quite possible. Sandra and I, who work as a midwife almost full-time, even took a 2-week vacation last May to soak up the sun together in Key West. After a rejuvenating vacation, we returned tanned, rested, and ready to start a new life together, reflecting on my past failed marriage. When I took the elevator down to meet Sandra in the hospital lobby a year ago, I realized that I wanted my future to be clear and simple. I have already moved. I didn't understand why I should give up my current happiness for a woman who was still unfaithful and carefree, even if she didn't remember any of it. I know people who drink too much and don't remember anything the next day, but they are still the same people, and made it easier for me. She had a heart-to-heart talk with June and did everything she could to help her remember, even enlisting my old rival Charlie. But it didn't work out. After a while, June came to terms with the truth, although she couldn't remember it. In the end, this realization brought her great sadness. She became depressed until my guardian angel intervened. One weekday, Sandra went to Waynesville without my knowledge while I was on a business trip. It was only a few months later that she told me about it. Josh, I had to take action. Put yourself in her shoes and imagine how you would feel if your lover suddenly disappeared without explanation to marry someone else. I can't say for sure how I would react, but I suppose it would be similar to June's reaction. She knew that her husband or ex-husband was in love with another woman and intended to marry her. This news was undoubtedly going to be heartbreaking for her, and I sympathize with her pain. She acknowledged the reality of the situation and acknowledged that her own actions contributed to her current state of despair. I suggested that she make a decision, either admit the consequences of her actions or continue to live the way she lived before this turmoil began. She had a choice to move on, and she decided to do it for the sake of our friendship. When we were fishing in a large stream, 2 more Can-Am spiders appeared next to us. June and her partner, with whom she has been living for the last 6 months, joined us in trying to convince the big lurker to try again. Despite the betrayal, the divorce, and the difficulties associated with later life, June and I were able to come out of it all as friends. My parents have also come to terms with the situation and continue to love June, often inviting her to visit with a new partner. They've come to terms with reality, and I adore Sandra as much as I adore June. At the moment, my life is going well, and the only thing I'm worried about is how to accommodate the addition to our family in the limited space of our 2-seater Canyon. Sandra informed me last night that I'm going to be a father soon, and 3 years later, after June got married, she was still unable to get pregnant. Doctors informed her that she was infertile. Apparently, she doesn't deserve to be a mother. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.